Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ACLU Leadership Forum. I am so grateful to be in community with you all. We have assembled for you all this group of leadership supporters and Impact Society members for the special briefing offering a look inside of our work. My name is Elizabeth Chasteen Day. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, I am the organizing director for the ACLU of Ohio. Today, we're going to discuss the ACLU's voting rights plans ahead for this year's election. The conversation comes at an important time. Despite our historic win for voting rights at the Supreme Court last year and the successes at the ballot box in 2023, like in my state, there are no signs of anti-democratic forces letting up, especially during a critical election year. State politicians across the country continue to tamper with the electoral process in attempts to stifle voters from making critical civil liberties decisions. Efforts to rig the rules and suppress fundamental rights are taking place across states. That is why the ACLU is ramping up our litigation and advocacy efforts. We know that the presidential election is top of mind for everyone, but this conversation isn't about candidates themselves or about their civil liberties records, but rather this conversation is about all of us and how we can ensure that all eligible voters can cast a safe and secure vote that is counted. We'll also discuss our work to ensure fair maps so that voters can choose politicians and not the other way around. For both voting rights and redistricting, we benefit from two speakers who represent the very best of ACLU, our litigation, might, and our policy expertise. Chris and Sophia, if you all can turn your cameras on and wave hello, we would appreciate that. Hello, hello. Beautiful. Thank you. Chris Bruce is the policy director at the ACLU of Georgia, and Sophia Lynn Lakin is the director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. I'm looking forward to chatting with both of you today. Before we get started, I'd love to get a sense of how we're all entering this space. So we're going to open the chat for a brief moment. And for anyone who would like to share, please share one word in the chat to describe how you're currently feeling about election integrity in your state. I'm seeing scared, nervous, hopeful, depressed, concerned, a little apprehensive from Georgia, feeling good from Connecticut, frustrating, pessimistic, concerned. Alice is working. I love that. Concerned for other states, anxious and fine from Hawaii. Hawaii, I wonder if the sunshine and the beautifulness has anything to do with that. But nonetheless, thank you all for sharing. And really, what we're hearing is people are feeling concerned. I think it's safe to say that we all have a spectrum of emotions. But the fact that you all are here today is what tells me that we're all determined and united in this fight. We're going to close the chat now, but we have carved out time at the end of the program to answer your questions. So we encourage you to ask questions at any time by using the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many as possible. If you look at the chat, we should be able to drop the instructions now. Lastly, I also want to note that this is an off-the-record conversation. So if you're a journalist among us, please note that nothing that is said here is for attribution or citation. It's really important for us that this feels like an intimate forum and a safe space for you to raise your questions. With that, Sophia, you're up. So Sophia, I would love to start off with the environment that we're working in. For context, can you remind us how many bills were introduced last year? And looking ahead, what can we expect this year?
Thank you, Elizabeth. And first, I just want to say thank you to all of you for showing up and being a part of this discussion, and of course for all the incredible support for the work that we do. But turning to your question, Elizabeth, in 2023, we saw quite a few states, 14 states, enact 17 laws that will make it harder to vote. And we're likely to see that continue into 2024. In fact, at the end of last year, 25 states had either a pre-filed bill or a bill being carried over from 2023 that would make it harder to vote. At the same time, we're also starting to see an uptick on attacks to pro-voting legislation, laws that make voting more accessible. So that's another area where we've had to be on the lookout and hop in to defend these good voting laws. So in addition to getting prepared to ensure that we at the ACLU here in VRP and our affiliates across the country are ready to protect the 2024 elections from forces of nature and forces of sabotage and everything in between, we'll be watching these state legislatures and watching for these challenges to pro-voting laws and policies and bringing them to court when necessary.
Thank you for that. So it is pretty clear that the threat is high, but the good news is that we are largely winning in courts. Is that right, Sophia?
Well, yes, that's right. These are hard-fought battles. But in 2023, we were able to notch 15 successes in terms of protecting the vote. And that's against 5 losses, just to make the record clear. But I also want to just flag that while we always point out the anti-voter laws coming out of state legislatures, we also saw a lot of pro-voter laws getting passed across the country, in no small part with a lot of work done by our affiliates and coalition partners on the ground. So there's good news.
Yes, it is. And I always think that is a worthy shout out. So thank you for doing that. Can you give us a quick overview of the types of cases that we took on, and where were the opportunities and where have there been challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. There are 4 pillars to the work that we do. Redistricting, ensuring people's votes are counted equally. Then we're protecting and expanding access to the ballot. We work to restore voting rights to returning citizens. And we work to expand and safeguard federally mandated voter registration opportunities. We're always doing work in all of these areas. But because of the once-in-a-decade redistricting cycle that follows on the decennial census, and where we are in the election cycle with the big election coming at us very quickly, the vast majority of the work that we've been taking on over the last 2 years has been primarily aimed at 2 goals. The first is getting as fair maps as possible in place for the 2024 election cycle. And toward that end, we brought 11 cases challenging either congressional or statewide state legislative maps in 7 states, with a particular focus on fighting attempts to minimize the voting strength of Black voters and their communities. These communities really have, in their interests, have been dismissed by their elected officials for far too long, and that's apparent in those officials' really dismal neglect when it comes to the issues that matter most to these communities, be it around hospitals, schools, criminal justice, abortion rights, trans justice, and the like. So the second big push in our work has been around getting as much fair access to the ballot as possible for voters in the 2024 elections. The kind of restrictions we're seeing really run the spectrum, but we've been continuing to see attacks on mail voting, and more recently, a more concerted attack on organizations and individuals who are helping people overcome the many barriers to the ballot box. Things like the ban on providing a bottle of water or some crackers to a voter waiting in Georgia's notoriously long lines and heavily blocked precincts, or limiting who can provide assistance to a voter with disability and adding criminal penalties to that. Given the hostility truly of the courts and the weakening the outright stripping of some of the core tools that we've used to challenge voter suppression laws for decades, we made the pivot to add to our arsenal different tools and legal theories over the last couple of years. We've leaned more heavily on First Amendment and the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example, and also looked to state courts and state constitutions. And we've really seen this pivot start to bear fruit in some of our successes over the last 18 months. In the last year or so, really seeing the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Chris, you're up to bat. I would love to bring you in to talk about the significant work the Georgians have put into blocking voter suppression in your state. Anti-democratic lawmakers are terrified, we already know, of voters having full voting power. This is evident in the bills like Georgia's SB 202. Can you break down the threats of that bill and how the ACLU and ACLU of Georgia are equipped to fight it?
Elizabeth, thank you for having me. And it's always great to be working with Sophia. We work very closely together, fighting voter suppression. So Sophia is like another staff member at the ACLU of Georgia. And thank everyone for your time today. Getting out this information is critical, especially within this election year. Without the help from previous years, bills like SB 202 could have actually been worse. And that's where I want to start off with. SB 202 is a case study in voter suppression. Not many people know this, but there are over 160 different voter suppression bills introduced the same year as SB 202. And it was a game to make sure that advocates like the ACLU of Georgia would always be off, not knowing which bill was going to pass. But it didn't stop us. When they were having hearings at 7 a.m. every day, we were there testifying. We testified on this bill more than any other organization, to the point where the chairman pointed out to us as saying, well, it doesn't matter how early, the ACLU of Georgia will be there. And we were. And luckily, being there, we were able to stop even worse measures that did not pass, such as eliminating souls to the polls programs and Sunday voting, and also expanding some early voting access. But unfortunately, the bill is still bad. It's still one of the worst voter suppression bills in the country. And that's where we really pick up with what it does do. Like Sophia pointed out, line warming, giving refreshments to people who may wait in long lines is criminalized. It's horrible. Not even staff workers can give it to them. So we're talking about people who are neighbors, people who are friends in that community, and people who have to wait in long lines because these places are not adequately funded to deal with the amount of people who actually want to exercise their constitutional right to vote. You cannot help them in that way. And as you can imagine, people with disabilities suffer the most when it comes to this. They were already inadequately funded with the right resources and places, and now the attacks continue. So there's a lot more that deal with that bills. I'm, again, happy to be working with Sophia and fighting it once it passed the legislature, the immediate lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU, especially with some wins, and pointing out that we are working with groups that are on the ground, grassroots groups like the African American Methodist Episcopal Church, as well as Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, one of the longest and oldest sororities in the nation, African American woman-led sororities in the nation. So we'll continue to fight and we'll continue to win when it comes to SB 202.
That is the right attitude to take, and that is what's going to happen. Thank you for that, Chris. So I know that the 2023 legislative session was a mixed bag for Georgia. Was there any other groundwork laid in 23 that opens up opportunities for Georgians in 2024?
Yes. So like everything else, there are bad things, but there are also some good things that we also advocate for. So Senate Bill 129, SB 129, that made it through both chambers easily. It's a good bill that expands the ability of employees to take time off for early voting in the same manner provided for early day voting. So before, you could only take time off on the day of voting. But now that we have early voting in Georgia, we're extending that right to employees. this was so much of a no-brainer that actually it was a bipartisan piece of legislation, which we always have to work on carefully about. It doesn't matter what happens. Politics is politics. One side's going to get upset. The other side is going to get upset too. So the ACLU of Georgia, working with Democrats and Republicans, we're able to help push this through with a lot of our coalition partners. And we're seeing the benefits from it. People now have more flexibility when it comes to being able to vote in Georgia.
That's excellent. Thank you, Chris. So along with litigation and political advocacy, I also want to mention the ACLU's organizing work and our impact in securing numerous ballot wins last cycle. Like I said, I'm from Ohio, and I am our organizing director here with the ACLU of Ohio affiliate. And I had the major honor of witnessing a victory in Ohio where we helped to codify reproductive rights in the Ohio Constitution. We were able to collect 700,000 signatures. When we qualified in July, it was probably one of the happiest days of my life. When we won with a landslide in a state like Ohio for abortion access and reproductive rights, I knew the power of the ACLU. Prior to that win, we had also defeated our opponent's attempt to block that measure from getting on the ballot. Knowing that other states like Arizona are following suit and attempting to rig electoral rules, organizing around ballot measures will be a key part of our 2024 electoral toolbox. Now, I want to turn us to fair maps. At its core, redistricting is all about trying to dilute the power of certain voting groups, especially Black voters. Sophia, you were on the Supreme Court steps last October with our colleagues from the ACLU of Alabama when we participated in arguments for Allen versus Milligan, a critical case in the fight against racial gerrymandering. Can you explain the win and how it affects ongoing redistricting legislation?
Always happy to talk about our landmark win in Allen versus Milligan. That's the case. That's a challenge to Alabama's congressional map, which provided just one of 7 districts in which Black voters could elect a candidate of their choice, even though they make up 27% of the of the state's population. The Supreme Court ultimately agreed with us that that Alabama map, violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act by diluting Black voting strength, and that the state needed to redraw that map. It also affirmed the legal framework that we, the voting rights advocates, have been using for decades to protect the voters, Black voters, voters in the South, voters of color across the country, but especially in the South. So for the first time this year, Alabama will have 2 districts in which Black voters have the opportunity to elect their preferred candidates. The momentum that is given to the advocates on the ground in Alabama, who are now mobilizing around 2 excited about candidates that they have the opportunity to elect in 2 districts, is really quite inspiring. But also, I would say the win gave us huge momentum in our other cases challenging unfair maps under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And we were able to take that momentum to go beyond Alabama and to wins in both Georgia, Louisiana, and we're optimistic that there'll be more to come.
Absolutely. We've seen pushback from the state of Alabama post-Allen v. Milligan, which we expected. We know that our opponents won't go down without a fight. So how are we proactively gearing up for subsequent attempts to block fair maps?
Yes, that's unfortunately true. You're exactly right. Our opponents keep on swinging and flinging mud at the wall to see what sticks and continuing to try to tear down or dramatically weaken the Voting Rights Act and other tools that we've been using to fight back. And unfortunately, we've had some judges willing to entertain some really radical arguments. So what we're doing, we have this momentum, we're taking it, we're trying to close the gap as quickly as we can and get as much success as we can today in this time. But we're also constantly looking to anticipate those arguments that we're seeing, and work behind the scenes to ensure that we've built out the best evidence, the best data and facts and expert analysis, the best legal arguments, so we can move quickly to nip those arguments in the bud where we can, but also to have all our ducks lined up to fight this up to the Supreme Court if we have to.
Thank you for that, Sophia. Chris, turning back to you. Most of the cases that we are involved in the South are happening, including one in Georgia challenging newly drawn district lines. Can you give us an update on this case and how it could impact the 2024 election?
Oh, absolutely. And let me tell you, the maps that were drawn in 2021, the newly redistricted maps, the ACLU was at every hearing across the state. There were more than 12 hearings, and we testified at all of them with advocacy and coalition partners. So it was very surprising, or not surprising, because we knew it was going to happen, that they would draw maps diluting Black voting power. And of course, the ACLU jumped in and said, we need to do something about this. And according to the lawsuit, the Georgia General Assembly could have and should have drawn more than half a dozen additional new Black majority districts in light of the tremendous amount of growth in the Black population over the previous decade. That's what they should have done. Did they do that? Absolutely not. But when you file a lawsuit and you have great lawyers like Sophia up here and other great ACLU advocates, the judge actually agreed with the ACLU and ordered the Georgia General Assembly, I can't express that enough, told the governor to bring in 236 legislators in over a week to make sure that they can draw new maps. Judge Jones reviewed the new maps in the legislature. Well, let me go back. We were there working with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, the largest Black caucus in the nation, to ensure and give advice and consult with them about how the new map should have been drawn, pointing out the districts of where the new maps should be drawn to maintain or actually increase Black voting power in districts that the judge was talking about. But again, Judge Jones came in, saw the newly redrawn maps, and approved them due to the increase of Black majority districts. Let me be clear. This is a win, okay? It's something that does not get accomplished often, but it is a win. However, it's not the win that's needed at this time. There should be more Black majority districts, according to the census and according to every piece of data possible. And that's why the ACLU continues to fight in the courts by appealing this decision and to increase more voting power. We expect to win. I'm not the lawyer on this case. You have to talk to Sophia about all that. I always say we're going to win. And we're also fighting back. We're using this situation to go into Black communities and say they are purposefully diluting your right to vote and everything else that's happening in here. We need you to show up in November now. If you haven't been counted before, you have to be counted now. Otherwise, literally your right to vote is being taken away.
Yes, I feel that deeply, Chris. Sophia, from a planning and strategy standpoint, I know the data is key. Can you speak to your legal team's partnership with the ACLU's data and analytics team?
For sure. That team, the ACLU's data analytics team, they are truly the unsung heroes of the work that we do. There is no way that we could do, especially this redistricting work, which is so incredibly data heavy and technical, relies on mapping capabilities and analysis, and so much quantitative analysis. We wouldn't have been able to do this work without this incredible team of people, and absolutely a joy to work with. I don't know how they feel about us, but we really see them as just absolutely critical members of our team, and so do our co-counsel, to be frank. None of our peer organizations have the kind of data analytics heft that we bring to the table. And I think everyone who has had the benefit of working with them would agree without question that they are the only reason we've been able to move as quickly as we have, as smartly as we have, and also as efficiently as we've done.
Yes, I can concur. Data played a tremendous role in Ohio last year, whether it was making sure that we had predictive modeling for both of the ballot initiatives that we handled in 1 year and won, or ensuring that we were knocking on the right doors at the right time, specifically for the repro campaign. We know that if we didn't have clear, understandable data, that we probably would not have won. That is how key data is. So modeling for us, based off of what we did for the One Person, One Vote campaign in August, helped us to understand what we needed to do for persuasion during the repro campaign in November. All of that pre-work, the signature collection data, the numerous phone calls that I personally made during phone banking, our text banking conversations, all of that helped us to ensure that we could have the key conversations we needed to have in order to persuade voters to vote their values on our key issues. Those lessons that we learned will feed into other states as we head into 2024. While we have various teams focusing on voting, advocacy, organizing, data analytics, this work has shown that fighting for voting rights is truly an all hands on deck effort across the board, or as we like to say in our ACLU speak, it is integrated advocacy at its best. And the work ahead for this election year will need to be as collaborative and as intersectional as possible. Chris, as our opponents who have been systematically stripping away at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act know very well, voting rights and fair representation go hand in hand with racial justice. That's why we're building the political power of Black communities, and it's a pillar of the ACLU Systemic Equity Campaign. Can you speak to the goal that we have to ensure that Black Americans are adequately represented in our democracy?
Yeah, and let's be clear about this. The ACLU has taken a hard look at how we've shown up in the past, especially dealing in communities of color, especially within the Black community. Instead of saying, we'll just help you out with this one problem. No, we've taken another stance of saying, we want to be partners with you in this. It isn't there's one problem that pops up, we solve it, and then we go away and come back for the next problem. We want to steadily build up the resources and allocation of justice in these areas so we can eliminate it altogether. So as part of our ongoing work, to ensure that legislators reflect the constituencies that address these long-standing underrepresentation and disempowerment of Black communities, we will still advocate for voting districts such as in Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina, in the South altogether, because that's where the problems really happen. They stem from in the South and they spread across the nation. But these 4 states are ground zero, and we'll continue to fight there.
Thank you for that. ACLU affiliates are leading the charge when it comes to local and state electoral work. So Chris, what should we be paying attention to in Georgia? And how can some of Georgia's work be replicated in other states?
So I'm going to be completely transparent. I'm also the senior advisor of the Southern Collective, the 12 Southern states. And I love all of them, but I am based in Georgia. I am based in Atlanta. I've been shaped by everything that's happened here, especially over the past couple of years. I used to make a joke of nobody talked about Georgia this much since the Civil War. And after spending and elevating people's votes to get a Senator Warnock and a Senator Ossoff and another new president that happened, Georgia still stands at the forefront of this, as well as the ACLU of Georgia. So when we're talking about Georgia's work has been seen across the nation and internationally. I get calls all the time over what's happened in Georgia. And it all starts in the community. The community, we're trying to bring them to the legislature to make sure that they're still fighting back on these voting bills. We have bad voting bills this session that we are currently in right now that we are trying to keep down and not passing. We want people who are at the ballot box, not just talking about going and voting, but actually working in these areas. Banning drop boxes is a serious problem that has constantly come up in the Georgia legislature that we're constantly monitoring and constantly trying to fight back on. Reducing the early voting hours, reducing the amount of days for voting in runoffs. These are all coming up. Let me just tell you, I have a lot of job security right here because there's a lot of problems that happen down here. We're just trying to do everything that we can do to fight back on this. And again, as senior advisor of the Southern Collective, this isn't just happening in Georgia, it's happening in Tennessee, which has one of the lowest rates of voter participation. And we're working to get that up. Why is that happening? People with felonies are completely disenfranchised, one of the worst states in the nation for that. We're working to make sure that these people's voices are being upheld and heard. And of course, I cannot forget about the Southern Voting Project. This is mostly the 12 states coming together and dealing with messaging of making it easy and accessible for people to vote. We've gone into all these states and built out campaigns to work in communities that are typically overlooked and uplifting their voice. It's a lot of work. I cannot express to you how much that's going to take, but when it comes down to it, we will win within this. The last thing I'll point out is our poll worker project program. It's something that happened when Georgia in its primary in 2020, we had 13 to 15 hour waits in line. Why was that? Because of COVID. The average poll worker's age in Georgia in 2020 was 72 years old. So a lot of people called out in fear of COVID. Now we launched a poll worker program, surprisingly with the State Bar of Georgia and our Secretary of State, who we were actively suing to put up younger lawyers in all of the polling precincts in Fulton County and around Georgia. This was a very successful program that we're going to replicate everywhere else because our philosophy is if you're the one who's at the polling precinct, you're the one who can make sure that people are ready to vote. You cannot have voter suppression there if you're the one from your community helping people get through. So that's happening in Georgia. We were the largest organization that placed the largest amount of poll workers. We'll replicate that in 2024, not only in Georgia, but across the other states as well.
Thank you. I know that narrative shifting takes a lot of time. And so, Chris, that's what I'm reflecting on and resonating with what you were just talking about regarding shifting the narrative around voting. And that's something that we're doing right now in Ohio. It's still too soon to speak about all the specific ballots and the candidate races, but we are getting started. The ACLU of Ohio has officially invested our time, our capacity, our money in a redistricting ballot measure that proposes to replace our current, extremely gerrymandered Ohio Redistricting Commission with a citizen-led redistricting commission. Sophia and Chris, I would love to hear from you both about what the ACLU is doing to prepare for the 2024 election and what we can all do, especially in these battleground states.
A great question and something that we've been mulling around with. And I know just looking at some of the questions that people have been asking and in the Q&A as we've been talking, we've been doing a lot of work here at the National ACLU, as well as in connection with all the affiliates across the country, but in particular in our so-called battleground states, which comprise 11 states where we imagine that we will see some of the biggest threats to the election percolate. We've been doing a ton of scenario planning, threat assessments, and starting to lay the groundwork for a coordinated response where necessary, rapid response where necessary, so that we're ready to go for anything that might come at us come election day. There's a lot of different things that may arise or may not, like I said, from forces of nature to all manner of certification questions that folks I know are very concerned about, and the like. And we had a huge battleground state in-person convening back in December, where we started to lay that groundwork, and affiliates from across the country in those battleground states sent all folks, from the organizing side to communications to legal to advocacy work, to make sure that, like I said, we are prepared for anything that might come at us in the days to come. Some of the things that you as individuals might consider doing along the way, and Chris spoke a little bit about some of these things: volunteers, poll worker. Ensure your voter registration is up to date for yourself, for your network. You should not underplay how important it is for your own advocacy to your own network in terms of getting people to check their registration, to get registered to vote, to actually show up at the polls. Make a plan to vote, encourage other people to make a plan to vote. Again, you'd be surprised how many people on day of realize they can't get to the polling location because you just hadn't really thought that through. Know your rights, know who to call if you see issues, be first responder in that regard. Sign up with the ACLU, your ACLU affiliate to be an official observer on election day. Organize your fellow supporters of voting access to attend local election board administrative meetings, to advocate for expanded ballot access. Some of those things can be done at that level. And also so you can report issues to your ACLU affiliate or join the board yourself. And of course, sign up at peoplepower.org to join all of us in our voting rights campaigns and hear the latest of what's going on and how you can get involved. It's going to be changing with a changing environment, and that is the best way to find out what's necessary in the moment.
So true. Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, and Sophia covered everything pretty much. I will definitely say that the ACLU of Georgia, as well as other affiliates, are still fighting voter suppression bills. If you haven't heard about it, if the media has not told you about it, they're there. You can contact your local ACLU affiliate to find out more about them and find out more about how to fight against these bills down in your legislature. One of the stances that we've made is working with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, the largest Black caucus in the nation, to empower their representatives to go into their communities and tell them more about voting to make sure they voted for these representatives in the first place. Might as well go back and get them to vote and increase the amount of vote. These are trustworthy people that happen. And so much so, thanks to our redistricting case and our work there, I'm happy and proud to say that the ACLU of Georgia is going to receive the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus Chairman's Award, the highest award that's given to the caucus. Thank you for this type of work. It's a very prestigious award that we do not take lightly, and it actually encourages us to work even more. We're not just working with the GLBC, though. We're working with the Georgia Youth and Justice Coalition to increase the amount of people, young people in college and elsewhere, and having them being able to vote. A lot of people, especially in colleges, they may come from out of state, so they may not be registered to vote there. So we're working with them and these groups who are with the Georgia Youth and Justice Coalition. They're part of these colleges and installations. So it's not us coming in and telling them what to do. We're educating college students on how to fix this problem and working with the schools and universities to fix it on their own, including, and this is a pivotal point, early voting access on college campuses. As we've seen, every study we've shown, when you have an early voting location on a campus, surprisingly, voting goes up. So we're going to try to do our best to deal with that. So I think Sophia pretty much covered how you can get involved. I just want to remind everyone, democracy is not a passive sport. It is a very assertive and aggressive sport. You get out what you put in. So it's not just going in and voting. You have to do this within your community. You should be demanding from your board of elections, not just your plan to vote, but their plan on getting people out to vote and making it more accessible for everyone. And you can do that. You literally can talk to them. I always tell them it's not about if I know my state representative or state senator. It's about if do they know me? And they do know me because I email them and I text them almost every day. And they should know you. And that's what you should be doing, making sure you know the people who are in charge to make sure they are at the forefront of protecting your voting rights.
That is the key, especially making sure that every person is engaged. Here at the ACLU of Ohio, we have what we call campus action teams. They are one of our organizing arms. And so we are working with our campus action teams to make sure that they've been through civic school, understand how the branches of government work, understand how to cast a vote, and to understand what the Voting Rights Act and other voting bills afford them, especially in our state, as heavily gerrymandered and as heavily suppressed as we are here in Ohio, with one of the most intense voter ID bills in the country. So with that, not all is lost. We will continue to fight and live for another election and even more democracy than what we have in this moment. Now we are going to shift and we are opening up for a time for Q&A. We received some pre-submitted questions and we'll also take some that are live. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. There also may be questions that we simply can't answer today. However, what we don't get to, we'll be sure to follow up after the event. Makiba, can you share the first batch of questions?
Yes, if you have any questions and you would like to ask your question out loud, please use the raise hand feature found at the bottom of your screen and we will unmute you. If you're joining by telephone today, dial *9 to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Otherwise, please enter your questions in the Q&A panel found at the bottom of your screen. Elizabeth, we did have quite a few questions come in via the pre-submitted chat and the Q&A panel. So I'm going to give you a batch of 3 questions first. The first one from Carol K. What can you tell us about redistricting challenges in Wisconsin? Next up, from Mark L. What will the ACLU do to ensure an accurate voter count where there are new elections personnel? And the last for this batch, Neil B. How will the Trump judicial appointments and slow walking of Biden judicial appointments affect the states where voting rights are most under fire?
Sophia or Chris, are there any in particular that you all feel hungry to answer?
I'm gonna let Sophia go first.
I'll try to start with first question, which is about redistricting in Wisconsin. It's not a case that we are involved in, but you probably have seen news that the map was struck down because it didn't comply with what is called traditional redistricting principles, and a new map has to be drawn. And there's a battle right now, I'm going to say, between the governor and the legislature in terms of what is an appropriate map right now. So that is what is happening at the moment.
I'll talk to you about getting 18 to 35-year-olds to vote down ticket, right? And this is a great question because most people always vote up ticket, while the people that you elect down ticket, they impact you the most. 18 and 35-year-olds may not realize that. So that's what we're doing. We are first educating these individuals by telling them what your local county commissioner, what your local state representative, what your local state senator does, and why it's so important to pay attention, not only to the person who's running, but to the things that matter to you the most. We've noticed that when people will go out and vote, when there's something that there's talked about that impacts their lives, their communities, and their families. So we're doing our best to educate, to equip them with the tools that actually come in. So talking points, telling them you should be asking these type of questions or inquiries about these type of questions. And that's where we stay hands off, because we're not telling them what's important to them. We're just trying to tell them this is how you get in touch with your board of elections. This is how you get in touch with your state representative. Your issues are your issues, and we're here to help you protect democracy. And we're mostly training these people to become captains in their communities. We found out that if you have people who look, work, and are the same age and type, then they'll pay attention to that same demographic. I'm outside of the 18 to 35-year-old graphic anymore, so I don't talk. I get the other people out there to talk, and they're excited to do it. And we've seen some amazing things. And the great thing about this is once you train them, they'll always stay updated and they always do it again. We're always going to have another election. I said that hesitancy because I know our democracy is definitely under attack. So we have to have another election. And the more people that we do train and educate, equip, and empower to do this type of work means that we can actually come out on the better side of it.
Thank
So I'll
you.
hop in on, at least to begin the question on there's a question about what the ACLU will do to ensure an accurate voter count where there are new elections personnel. This is where we've been so fortunate to have our affiliates across the country, people like Elizabeth and Chris, monitoring what's happening and also strengthening relationships with local elections boards who are at the front line of ensuring that there's accuracy, and every vote that should be counted is in fact counted. And of course, participation in the election protection hotline world is another place where we are monitoring all of these issues closely with our other partners and in this space. And of course, then if we need to, we're ready to go and to go to court and make sure that those ballots are counted like we did, for example, in Georgia in 2022 in Cobb County, where people were not getting ballots sent to them that they asked for in time due to an error, and we were able to get new ballots sent out, an additional relief for these particular voters have their ballots counted. So those are different things that we are planning to do. And then on judicial appointments, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that unfortunately there are some judges who are receptive to some of the arguments that we're seeing from our opponents that are really weakening our ability to do the work, or heightening the burden that we have to show in court on many of these issues. So it does make our work harder in the places where we are most needed. And the good news, I think, is that we've been dealing with this for some time now. It's been a hostile environment for some time to be a litigator in this space. But as I mentioned earlier, we're winning. We're figuring it out. We're charting a path through, and making it hard for even judges that are predisposed, perhaps not to hear the evidence we're putting before them, to really come around. And that's been the case in Georgia and elsewhere around the country. So we will persevere and make our way through, but it is a more complicated and more difficult and more expensive, resource intensive environment.
Sophia, can I add one quick thing about that Cobb example? I just want to highlight, this happened within 24, 48 hours. Contacting the Cobb County Board of Elections chair, trying to figure out a way to rectify the problem. They actually admitted and thanked the ACLU for finding these problems with all these people and then trying to find the best way. So salute to you, salute to your team, and everybody else who was involved with that, because these people would not have been able to vote if it wasn't for the countless hours of staying up late at night and working out a solution for it. So again, kudos for you.
And I say kudos to your team. For people do ask, I think this is a great example of how we work together in the integrated advocacy kind of space.
Right.
And this was truly a joint effort with the policy folks who had the connections with the county elections officials to understand the problem. And it got to us so quickly, and we were able to work together hand in hand to ensure that we got results for voters. So I do want to lift that up, because that is how this is meant to work, and it really worked effectively in that moment.
Yeah, I'm not playing about this. Literally text the board chair of the Board of Elections. And we're good friends. So when I say you can text them, you can. They can be in your phone, and they appreciate the guidance. Remember, they're just a neighbor next door to you as well. So don't feel intimidated. They definitely appreciate the help if you're helping.
We have another set of questions that are ready to go. Makiba?
Yes, so the first one from this batch is Julie K. How are you finding young people to work the polls? Next up from Barbara, how can we help beyond donating money? And then finally, from Greg, what can be done about secretaries of state who support the big lie and will be in positions of influence over the 2024 election process and results?
Sophia, I'm going to start off with how are you finding younger people to work the polls? Well, this is an interesting question that I really love because there's been so many different creative ways that we've done this. In Georgia, people who are in high school can actually be poll workers. So not only telling them that, hey, you can get a day off from school, but you actually get paid for this type of work. That's one of the things that we've been doing. We've gone into these high schools and colleges, been invited by classroom professors and teachers to talk to their students, to tell them more about this situation. This is civics 101 at the ground level. It's not something that you just learn in a book, it's something that you actually experience. And these are type of jobs that younger people have actually put on their resumes as experience as well. So it's not a hard sell. I will add one more thing. A lot of places that we go, we actually do have like pizza parties and stuff too, just outside of the line warming line. So we still, yeah, we're still abiding by the law, but young people love pizza. I still love pizza. So we actually do feed a lot of individuals as well.
And talking about secretaries of state who support the big lie and being in positions of influence, there are a couple of things that can be done. Of course, next time they are up for election, they and other election deniers who are running for office, just make, we've certainly engaged in voter education around these issues to ensure voters know where the candidates stand on the issues. And lifting up that information and letting people know that that information exists is obviously one way to assert power over this, over these unfortunate candidates in these races. But we've also done other things to help sort of strengthen the system irrespective of that. So, for example, we quietly worked in Congress to help pass the Electoral Reform Count Act, which clarifies the Electoral Count Act and provides some of the guardrails for the certification process to prevent the ability of secretaries of state and other individuals to really infect and manipulate the process. So there are things that we've done to shore up the structure on the back end to ensure that it almost doesn't matter to sort of tie those hands. Obviously, again, we should be voting these people out based on their positions on the issues, but also then monitoring. There's a ton of monitoring that goes on so that we can hop in the minute we understand that there is something happening and mobilize people to go to the streets and shine a bright light on that issue, and then head to the courts as necessary.
Sophia, to reflect back on what you were saying, I think you answered Barbara's question. Again, Barbara's question was, how can we help beyond donating money? As the organizing director, I love when this question gets asked, because while we know that money does equal power, so do people, right? So for Barbara and folks who are wondering how you can get engaged beyond financial support, it is going to people power. It is ensuring that you're signed up to volunteer. I know every affiliate and with national, there are opportunities to help phone bank or text bank. You can knock doors. We really strongly suggest that people in our affiliate have what we call community conversations. And so we can give templates for conversations, and you host a conversation with people in your network, your neighbors, your friends, your family, to ensure that they understand what are the issues, what's on the ballot, and what their values are, most importantly. A lot of folks these days feel like they're in silos. And I believe that it is our job, our opportunity to ensure that we are breaking out of these silos by having conversations with those that we love and care about to make sure that they feel educated. Chris or Sophia, is there anything that you want to add to how else people can get engaged outside of their financial support?
Elizabeth, I want to harpen that even more of what you just said. I wear a lobbyist badge when I go down to the Capitol. It says ACLU of Georgia Policy Director. And a lot of times when I walk in a room, people moan. They were like, oh, here comes the ACLU again. Some people clap. They're happy to have us there. The reason why they clap or moan is because they already know my position on a bill. They already know what I'm going to say for the most part, and they already know where we're going to stand. The ACLU is an organization that's been around for over 100 years. You can predict how we are going to deal with the issue. What they don't see, though, are people from the audience, people from communities, their own constituents down there verifying from that. Because if you walk through the door and you don't have on a lobbyist badge, they're going to wonder, who are you with? Why are you down here? Why is this issue so important that you're going to miss work or time or just relaxation within this type of situation? So you're the key. If I say something, then you say, okay, ACLU has a position on this. But if you say something as a voter, as somebody who comes down there, that's when they get worried. That's when they get scared. And that's when they pay attention. So I would love for you to show up at whatever ACLU affiliate you're at. Let me know. I'll come with you. And we'll go ahead and fight for justice and voting rights everywhere.
That is right. Nothing more powerful than grassroots lobbying. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to Chris and Sophia for sharing your insights, your expertise, and helping us understand what our voting rights work looks like, as well as detailing how we can all act in our own communities. I am truly grateful to have been a part of this leadership forum today to discuss the ACLU's role and your role in our collective part in protecting and advancing voting rights and electoral integrity. We all have a lot of work ahead of us, but gatherings like this remind me of the incredible community that is fueling our work. The ACLU community is truly unmatched, and I say that, and I mean that. All of you, from our staff to our lawyers, our organizers, our volunteers, our donors, our activists on the ground, prove that there is strength in numbers, perseverance, and that we have the will of the people. If we weren't able to answer your question, please email us at leadershipforum@aclu.org. Thank you again.